They said the money was gone. Bad investments, they claimed, until I found a $750,000 transfer to a company in the British Virgin Islands. Hi, I'm Claire Monroe. I was the daughter they thought would stay quiet. But silence wasn't loyalty. It was erasure. Would you confront your own family if they stole from your future? Tell me in the comments, because what I uncovered next changed everything. Let me take you back to the brunch where the lies began. They didn't look devastated. They looked relieved. It's all gone, Claire, my father said, like we were discussing weather, not my inheritance. I had imagined the room would feel warmer, more welcoming after 2 years away. Instead, the air inside the Monroe estate was thick. Wood polish, fire smoke, old tension. The fireplace roared in the background, its heat somehow failing to reach where I sat. Not a single cup of coffee had been offered, not even a glass of water. I was home, but not really. Charleston in February was usually chilly, but that morning felt colder than usual, like even the walls had braced themselves for what was coming. The meeting had been called under the guise of a quick check-in on estate finances. That's what Ethan texted me last week. So casual, like we were just reviewing a spreadsheet. But when I stepped into the conference room with its heavy mahogany walls and that unbearable silence, I knew I was walking into something else entirely. They were already seated when I entered. Richard Monroe, my father, occupied the head of the table like a CEO about to dismiss a failed branch. Diana, my mother, wore her pastel cardigan like armor, her smile too wide, too practiced. Ethan looked polished as ever, tapping his pen against a notepad he hadn't written a word on. Rachel sat beside him, legs crossed, leaning forward just enough to seem engaged. I was directed to the only open seat, furthest from Dad. "We wanted you here in person," he said, steepling his fingers like he always did before bad news. "That sounds serious," I replied, though my voice caught in my throat. My hands were icy beneath the table. "There's been a downturn," Ethan chimed in. "Markets, volatility. Some decisions made by our prior advisor didn't pan out." Dad cut him off. "Claire, the trust is gone. The funds are depleted." Just like that. A surgical strike to the gut. No warning, no supporting documents, not even a screen to show figures. I blinked. "Gone?" Rachel offered a sympathetic nod. "It was a cascade of unfortunate timing. We didn't want to worry you until we had the full picture." "What is the full picture?" I asked. "There's no picture here. You're just handing me an empty frame." Mom shifted, smiling too much. "Sweetheart, we've all had to adjust. These things happen." "I'd like to see the records," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. Dad shook his head calmly. "You're no longer on the management list. That was updated last year." I turned to him sharply. "Who signed me off?" No one answered. Ethan looked at his watch. Rachel glanced toward the fireplace as if the flames might offer her an escape. That was when the heat inside me finally rose higher than the fire behind them. "You're all sitting here acting like this is an inconvenience, like I'm a child who spilled something on the rug." "We're trying to be honest with you," Ethan said, "and supportive. If you need help thinking through your next steps, I have contacts. There's a startup accelerator." "I'm not here for career coaching." I stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the wood floor. Mom reached for my hand but missed. "It's not a handout, honey. It's just reimagining things. A pivot." I laughed once, bitter. "No, it's betrayal, neatly packaged." The silence that followed felt rehearsed. I needed to breathe. My eyes drifted to the far wall where an old photo hung, a garden party, my 17th birthday. Ethan stood at the center, mid-speech. I remember that day. He spoke about family, legacy, Monroe pride. He didn't mention me once. In the photo, I was in green. I had baked a lemon tart for Dad that day, the kind he used to love when I was little. I piped the meringue myself, each swirl carefully done by hand. He never touched it. Said he was full after dinner. I remembered clearing the plate quietly as the others danced on the patio. Funny, the things that stick. That memory cracked something open. Suddenly, another one rushed in, clear as if it happened yesterday. I was 12, lingering near the study door I wasn't supposed to approach after 8 p.m. Inside, I heard Dad and Ethan talking, low voices clipped and certain. "She's sentimental, not strategic," my father had said. "When it's time, we'll shift everything under Ethan's authority." "And she'll go along with it?" Ethan had asked, sounding skeptical. "She doesn't have to go along. She just won't know until it's done." I had backed away that night, heart pounding, telling myself I'd misheard, that I was imagining things. But now, watching them, how rehearsed they were, how calm, it clicked. They had been planning this for years, and I had let it happen because I believed we were a family. Grandma Edith's voice came back to me then, raspy, wise, unapologetic. "Don't wait for people to hand you the truth. Sometimes you've got to pull it out of their teeth." I missed her more than I let on. I looked back at the people in front of me. They weren't villains, just disappointments. And disappointments, I was learning, could hurt worse because you expected better. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small leather notebook, my last printed statement from the trust fund, dated 18 months ago. Still had a healthy balance then. "You all keep talking about timing. Here's some." This was before I was removed. Before any of these mysterious losses. Rachel's voice softened. "Claire, we just didn't want to worry you. You should have." I walked to the door. My hand hesitated on the knob. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stood up, looked my father in the eye, and asked, "What else have you signed without telling me? If it was all gone, why were they renovating the summer house?" The question looped in my head like the clink of silverware on china. Rachel had just finished talking about the new Italian tiles, hand-painted Claire, for the terrace at Isle of Palms. Ethan chimed in next, sharing a casual anecdote about a private wine tasting they were hosting once the weather warms up. Supposedly, there wasn't $1 left in the trust, but here they were, toasting with fresh squeezed mimosas and renovating properties like it was still 2019. The guest wing of the Monroe estate hadn't changed much. Same cold linens, same view of the camellia bushes outside. Except now, there was a palpable distance. Like I wasn't just a guest, but an outsider. Over brunch, I sipped slowly, letting Rachel's words flow past me like static. But then came the phrase that snapped my attention. "Oh, and the new terrace is finally being finished next week. We'll finally have the view we've always wanted." I set down my fork. "What terrace?" Rachel smiled too quickly. "Oh, didn't Ethan mention it? The one at the summer house? We're expanding the back, just a little. The summer house. Still ours. Still under our name. And they were building, while I was supposedly broke." Later that evening, the estate grew quiet, save for the occasional rustle of tree branches brushing the windows. I lay on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, replaying brunch like a courtroom transcript. I couldn't sleep. The taste of the eggs Benedict still lingered with a sour edge. I opened my laptop, digging through old email archives, ones I hadn't looked at in years. Most were estate reports, family updates, overly polished newsletters from Richard's office. But then I saw it. An attachment. Subject line, "Amended cosigner update, Trust 48B." Dated, October 12th, 2022. I opened it, 3 pages, Legal formatting. A single highlighted line. Claire Monroe was removed as cosigner effective immediately. No digital signature from me, no initials. Just a note. Filed with internal trustees' consent. I froze. My chest tightened with something between fury and grief. Back in college, Ethan once told me, people don't go broke quietly. They go loudly, and they still fly private while doing it. I remembered laughing then. I wasn't laughing now. I needed more. So I texted Lauren, Dad's former assistant. She'd left 2 years ago and now worked at a small CPA firm downtown. Hey, I typed, I'm trying to clean up my taxes. Any chance you have old versions of the trust statements? Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. She replied an hour later, don't tell them I sent this. One PDF, condensed but dense. I scrolled. Page 3, line item, Seabridge Consulting, British Virgin Islands amount, $750,000. Routing ID, BVI INTL 38, EZ 42, BVI, British Virgin Islands. That wasn't Charleston. That wasn't even on this continent. I zoomed in on the routing number. Foreign code, for sure. Claire Monroe wasn't on the sender list, but Richard Monroe was. Have you ever discovered that the people who raised you also tried to erase you? The kind of silence that's not innocent, but chosen. If you've ever been kept in the dark by those who should have protected you, leave a comment number 7 below. Now, let's see what happened next. That name, Seabridge, itched at something in my memory. I'd seen it before. I minimized the document and opened a folder buried in my desktop. Old Monroe Projects. Inside were photos, drafts of reports, and one scanned letter from a consulting pitch my father once shared with the board. There it was. Suggested consultant, Seabridge, INTL, familiar with offshore processing structures. I stared at it for a while. Not just the number, but what it meant. This wasn't a bad stock call. This was a lifeboat, and I'd been left ashore. I closed my eyes and tried to remember something comforting. My hands gripped the armrest of the chair, and I suddenly thought of Grandma Edith's herb garden. She used to say, basil for memory, thyme for courage. She taught me to recognize each one not by look, but by scent. Just because it's hidden in the dirt, she once said, doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Sometimes what you don't see defines everything. The next morning, I found myself walking slowly along the back corridor of the estate, where the old photos were still hung in antique frames. There was one of Ethan holding a ribbon-cutting plaque at the summer house. My name wasn't mentioned in the caption. Below it, a photo of the original deed, tucked behind glass. I noticed a faint signature in the bottom right corner. Mine. From years ago. Forgotten by them. Not by me. The injustice wasn't just in the money. It was in the rewriting of history. In the way I was being quietly erased, like a pencil sketch rubbed away beneath bolder ink. I returned to my room and opened the PDF again. Seabridge. Seabridge. Who named it? Who approved it? For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt focused. I thought about calling Dad, demanding answers. I thought about forwarding the PDF to a lawyer. But instead, I just sat there, breathing, remembering, knowing that this document, was the start of something bigger. And yet, in the stillness, I also felt something unexpected. Calm. Not peace, not forgiveness. Just calm. Like I had stepped outside of the performance and could finally see the stage. This wasn't a bad investment. This was an escape route. They taught me how to hold my fork right. They never taught me what to do when the people who raised you lie with perfect posture. The cafe smelled like roasted hazelnuts and memory. I hadn't been back to old ground since my senior year of high school, back when it was more cluttered than chic, with mismatched mugs and chipped tables. Now it had reclaimed wood counters and uniform ceramic cups, but the sun still slanted through the windows the same way, catching the dust just right. I chose the booth in the back, the one next to the framed photo of the city's first bridge, a place Grandma Edith once called a gentle spot for hard truths. Samuel Bishop arrived 5 minutes late, but made it feel intentional. His suit was pressed, his smile minimal. He placed his briefcase on the seat beside him instead of the table, like it might overhear us. "I appreciate you meeting me," I began. He nodded once. "You said this was financial, but personal?" "It's both," I said, and slid over the printouts, carefully redacted to avoid obvious names, just routing numbers, dates, and the Seabridge wire transfer. He reviewed them with a lawyer's patience, lips pressed into a single thoughtful line. "Seabridge BVI," he murmured. "That name's not new to me." My breath caught. "You've seen it before?" "In cases where family funds moved overseas, sometimes above board, often not." He didn't elaborate, but the shift in his tone said enough. "Where did you get this?" "Let's just say, an old assistant with a good memory and a kind heart." He tapped his pen once against the table. "Claire, if this is connected to a trust or inheritance, you may be looking at misuse of fiduciary duty, but proving it will require more than routing numbers. You need something signed, something that names you." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders like Charleston humidity. We paused when the waitress came by, a young woman in her early 20s with a coral apron and a voice that reminded me of jasmine vines. I ordered black coffee. Samuel asked for tea. While we waited, I pulled out a photo I'd kept tucked in my notebook. Water damaged, edges curling, a snapshot from my senior year. A charity fundraiser. Grandma Edith, Ethan, and me, standing on the high school stage with a comically oversized check. I was dead center that day, holding the check with both hands. But when the local newspaper printed the photo, they'd cropped it to feature only Ethan and the check. "I remember this," I said, more to myself. Samuel looked up. "You were erased before, weren't you?" I blinked at him. "What?" He gestured lightly. "That's the emotional root here. You weren't just written out of money, you were written out of memory." That landed harder than I expected. Later that evening, I went to an art show hosted by a college friend. It was one of those events where the hors d'oeuvres looked too elegant to touch, and the wine was all locally sourced. Daniel was there, Ethan's former IT guy, now freelancing. I hadn't seen him since Mom's 60th birthday, where he'd gotten cornered by 3 uncles debating crypto. He waved when he saw me. "Claire Monroe, you still wear that pin?" he joked, nodding at the silver magnolia on my lapel. "Still suits me," I smiled. We made small talk, weather, music, how Charleston was gentrifying sideways. Then, without prompting, he said, "Funny thing, Ethan dropped this weird BVI folder on the family server months ago. Took forever to back it up. Big encrypted files. Are you guys doing business in the Caribbean now?" I tried to keep my voice casual. "Just sorting through old paperwork." But my hands felt suddenly clammy. I noted it down as soon as he stepped away. "Daniel. BVI folder. Server evidence." I left early that night. On the walk back to my apartment, I felt the cold more deeply than usual. The streetlights blurred through my glasses, and for a second I wanted to believe this was just coincidence. But too many lines were connecting, too many whispers trailing into one another. The next morning, I met Samuel again, this time in his office above an old bookstore. I gave him the summary of what Daniel had said, and the photo. I was nervous, pacing lightly by the bookshelf when I said it out loud. "I'm not chasing revenge," I told him, "but I won't let them write me out of my own story." He looked up, and for the first time, he smiled. "I believe you," he said. "Let's get your chapter back." I sat down, and we started to sketch a plan. Between our notes and the legal printouts, I noticed something odd I hadn't before: a discrepancy in the dates between one transfer request and the actual recorded movement of funds. The paperwork Ethan filled showed the transaction dated October 14th, but the bank receipt showed October 12th. 2 full days prior. Samuel's brow furrowed. That shouldn't be possible unless the form was predated or the transfer was backdated. Could that prove intent? I asked. It could prove manipulation, he said. And if that manipulation touches your role or your removal from the trust, it could be significant. I scribbled the details down. Every breadcrumb mattered. As I gathered my papers to leave, I hesitated by his office window. Outside, people passed by with scarves pulled tight, coffee cups in hand, everyday lives, unaware of the quiet wars others fought behind closed doors. Samuel stood beside me. "This won't be easy," he said. "I'm not looking for easy," I replied. "Just true." You know it's a trap when your family invites you to dinner and calls it a reset. The envelope was cream, thick as cardstock, and hand-delivered. Rachel's handwriting on the front looked more like a wedding invitation than a family dinner. Inside, a card embossed with the crest of Charleston's oldest private club. "A Monroe family reset dinner," it read. I almost laughed. Who names a dinner that? I stared at it under the kitchen light, sipping peppermint tea, my breath clouding the window glass. I hadn't seen most of them since the brunch in March, since I started asking questions. But now, in mid-November, 2 days before Thanksgiving, they wanted peace. I went. Of course I did. You don't gather evidence by staying home. The club's private dining room hadn't changed since I was a kid. Mahogany panels, gold sconces, and chandeliers that trembled when someone shut the doors too hard. The floral arrangements were heavy with eucalyptus and pale roses. The lighting was soft enough to hide tension, sharp enough to see judgment. Ethan stood when I arrived, napkin in hand. "Claire," he said with a politician's smile, "you look radiant." Rachel air-kissed my cheek and adjusted the napkin ring by my place setting. 5 forks, 3 knives, and a spoon I was sure had no purpose. "So glad you came," she beamed, teeth dazzling. Richard offered no hug, just a raised glass. "We're proud of your grace under pressure," he said. Not everyone would have taken things so maturely. I wanted to laugh, but I smiled. "I'm learning from the best." Diana nodded, her earrings catching the light. "Let's have a calm evening," she said. "It's just us. No lawyers, no accountants, just family." The appetizer arrived, seared scallops over parsnip puree. I cut them slowly, trying to ignore the bile rising in my throat. Every movement at the table felt rehearsed. How they poured wine, how they passed the bread. Rachel chatted about the new tile in the summer house. Ethan described a recent vineyard tour in Napa. I said little. I watched. Midway through the main course, filet mignon with truffle butter, Richard cleared his throat and reached into a leather folio. "I wanted you to see this," he said, sliding a stapled packet toward me. "A new family trust charter, cleaner structure, and we'd love for you to be a part of it again, under Ethan's guidance." He said it like he was offering me a gift. The room held its breath. I looked at the paper but didn't pick it up. "You want me to sign this tonight?" "Of course not," Ethan said, waving a hand. "Just look it over. Sleep on it. It's a way forward." I excused myself to the restroom. On the way, I passed the maitre d', who offered a stiff nod. The hall smelled of lemon polish and old money. As I rounded the corner back toward the dining room, I paused. The waiter was handing Ethan a leather check folio. Ethan slipped a card inside without hesitation. I leaned slightly, pretending to adjust my shoe, and caught a glimpse. The card said C.E. Monroe, not his initials. Mine. My stomach clenched. I snapped a quick photo, heart pounding but hands steady. In the restroom, I locked the stall and pulled out my phone. I forwarded the photo to Lauren, adding one line, "Tell me you can trace this." There was no immediate reply. I flushed the toilet out of habit, washed my hands too long, and stared at my reflection. My lipstick was still intact. My expression was unreadable. Just how they liked it. Just how I needed it to be. Back in the dining room, dessert had arrived, pear tart with honey cream. No one mentioned the packet again, but the air had shifted. I could feel it in the way Richard fiddled with his cufflinks, and Rachel refolded her napkin 3 times. As we sipped coffee, I let my gaze drift to a painting on the far wall, a scene of Charleston's battery during a storm. Grandma Edith used to say, "If they feed you steak but take your name off the deed, it's still theft." And just like that, a memory hit me. Thanksgiving 2008. I was 15. I had made place cards for everyone, calligraphy, gold ink. Rachel had praised them, even said mine was almost professional. But when we sat down for dinner, mine was missing from the adult table. I ate in the back room with the cousins, on paper plates, a folding chair, cranberry sauce in a plastic bowl. No one said a word. Back then, I thought it was a mistake. Now, I know better. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to be needed later when it's convenient? That quiet ache when you realize you were never part of us, just part of the solution. If you understand that kind of hurt, leave a comment number 9 below. Now, let's see how it ends. After coffee, I stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I'll sleep on the charter." Ethan smiled, eyes sharp. "We trust you will." Richard added, "Let's make this Christmas one to remember. Just family again." I nodded, sweet and silent. "We'll see." Outside, the night was crisp. I walked slowly, heels echoing on the old stone steps, the wind threading through my coat. I didn't need sleep to make my decision. They were using my name. They were laundering their guilt with floral arrangements and steak. But I was done playing the quiet daughter. They thought I'd go to court. I went to the press. Snow piled silently outside my studio window in Manhattan, burying trash bins and bike racks until everything looked pure, untouched. Inside, it was a different story. Legal printouts blanketed my floor like fallen leaves, and yellow sticky notes formed an angry constellation across my wall. January 2024 had arrived cold and clear, and I wasn't waiting anymore. I sipped coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago and stared at the press draft for the 5th time. It wasn't rage that moved my fingers. It was precision. Control. "Claire Monroe," it began, "former beneficiary of the Monroe Trust, has formally requested transparency following her unexpected removal from management and several high-value transfers to offshore entities, including Seabridge Holdings." I didn't name anyone. I didn't have to. Samuel had warned me, weeks before, sometimes justice isn't about winning, it's about writing your version first and loudest. And this version? It was loud in its quiet restraint. He joined my screen via video, his background tidy as always. "You're walking a fine line, Claire," he said. "But you're not defaming anyone. You're stating what's already on record, what they tried to bury." I nodded, eyes on the document. "The truth doesn't need makeup." He smirked. "But it does need timing." We chose Inc. magazine, not a tabloid, not a gossip column, a respected platform, and coincidentally, their March issue was themed Women in Finance, Stories That Shaped 2023. When the editor read my draft, she didn't ask for edits. She asked for supporting files. I sent them all. The story broke on a Wednesday. Not the front page, but page 6, right after a profile on a hedge fund CEO. The article didn't accuse, it described. It traced timelines, transfers, revoked permissions. It ended with a photo of me, not smiling, just present, captioned. Claire Monroe declines comment but provides documentation. Rachel must have seen it within hours. Her response came in pixels. A carousel post on Instagram, family portraits at the summer house, her hand on Ethan's back, captioned, "Family always finds a way." Comments poured in. "Isn't this the house your trust supposedly couldn't afford? Claire deserves better. Where's the transparency, Rachel?" I didn't reply. I made cinnamon tea and watched snow swallow the fire escape. The world didn't need another comment from me. It needed facts, and they were already on paper. By Friday, a law firm from DC emailed me directly. They offered representation for potential whistleblower protections. "We're monitoring public discourse," the partner wrote. "Your name's rising fast. If you feel unsafe or targeted, we'd be honored to advise." I reread that sentence 3 times. When I called Samuel, he didn't sound surprised. "This isn't a court," he said. "This is exposure, and exposure makes people nervous." But I didn't accuse anyone. "You didn't have to." A pause fell between us, soft and mutual. I remembered sitting with Grandma Edith as a child, watching court TV shows while she ironed linens. She always muttered, "The truth shows up in the third act, Claire." Always. I never knew what she meant, until now. To stay grounded, I made a habit that week of reviewing the file. Not to double-check. Just to remind myself, I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't ungrateful or bitter or petty. I was informed. And for the first time in years, that knowledge wasn't a weight. It was a weapon. I clicked through a few finance sites out of habit. The article had made its way into Reddit threads, LinkedIn think pieces, and even a panel discussion on Bloomberg's early morning segment. No one said my name outright, but shell companies, offshore ethics, and the Monroe question kept popping up. There was one blog post that stuck with me, not for its sharpness, but for its clarity. A young financial analyst had written, "You can't unsee a pattern once someone points to it." That line echoed louder than any headline. That night, I sat cross-legged in the middle of my tiny living room, surrounded by legal pads and printed emails. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt centered. The same way I used to feel when Grandma handed me a tart lemon pastry and said, "This one's just for you." It wasn't the dessert that mattered. It was the feeling of being acknowledged. Later, I stood at the window, notebook in hand, watching lights blink across neighboring buildings. My fingers were numb, not from cold, but from holding the pen too tightly. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't a theater. This was visibility. This was me taking up space in a story they'd tried to erase me from. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to be needed later, when it's convenient? That quiet ache when you realize you were never part of us, just part of the solution. If you understand that kind of hurt, leave a comment number 9 below. Now, let's see how it ends. The money didn't come back, but the clarity did. The rooftop smelled faintly of rosemary and fresh paint. A low breeze carried the laughter of early guests, mingling with the clink of iced tea glasses and soft jazz from a rented speaker tucked near the potted fiddle-leaf fig. It was April 2024 in Brooklyn, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for something to go wrong. I stood near the edge of the terrace, sunlight warming the tops of my shoulders. Behind me, a banner fluttered. True Ledger Foundation, opening day. No Monroe logos, no heirloom crests, just clean lines and my name, spelled correctly, on every brochure. Lauren emerged from the crowd, balancing 2 lemon tartlets and a half-full glass of sparkling water. "Do we toast with iced tea, or just withstanding our families?" she joked, handing me one of the pastries. "I'll take both," I said, smiling. "And I'm eating this lemon tart for myself this time." It was the same recipe I'd once baked for my father. This time, I didn't wait for anyone to notice. I took a bite and let the tang settle across my tongue, slow and unapologetic. The press was modest, a few independent journalists, some nonprofit bloggers, one local station. But they asked sharp questions. Why financial manipulation? Why now? Why make it public? I didn't read from a statement, I just told the truth. Some inherit wealth, I said. Others inherit silence. I refuse both. This organization isn't about revenge, it's about education, about giving people the tools to see when control masquerades as care, to name what no one else will name. Lauren nodded quietly beside me, and I remembered the first time I called her back in March 2023, pretending it was just tax season clarifications. She'd known something was wrong, even then, and she helped anyway. I spotted one of the interns nervously adjusting the projector cables. A hiccup in the presentation caused the welcome screen to flicker, revealing the early donor list again. I glanced up, expecting the usual. Mostly names I recognized. Friends, colleagues, a few from Samuel's network. But then one name stopped me cold. Daniel Herrera. I blinked. Daniel, the IT tech from the gallery opening who'd casually mentioned backing up Ethan's folder without realizing its significance. He wasn't wealthy. He certainly wasn't a power player. And yet, there he was. A modest donation. Enough to be seen. Lauren leaned over, catching my gaze. You okay? Yeah, I said slowly. Just surprised in a good way. We stood quietly for a moment. Sometimes the loudest healing happens in silence. Guests began filtering through the booths and material displays. One asked if we would be offering private consultations. Another asked how we'd reach young adults still under their parents' financial thumb. The questions were practical, necessary. And every answer I gave felt like a line in a story I finally got to write in ink. I glanced down at my planner. Appointments for the week included a seminar on financial gaslighting, a podcast interview, and a workshop for first-generation college students. I hadn't written any of it with vengeance in mind. I'd written it to prove that reclamation could be soft, gentle, ongoing. Near the refreshment table, a small framed note sat beside a stack of brochures. I hadn't placed it there. Lauren must have. It was Grandma Edith's handwriting, yellowed and faded, tucked into a recipe book years ago. You were always meant to lead, not beg. I swallowed. Hard. I wasn't crying. Not really. But something inside me softened, like a tight muscle finally unclenching after years of strain. A girl no older than 20 approached me near the stairs. Her name tag read, Aaliyah, volunteer. Hi, she said nervously. I just wanted to say, my dad still controls my bank account. I'm 21, and until today, I didn't even know that it had a name. She held up a copy of one of our leaflets. I thought I was just being ungrateful, but now I think, maybe I just needed the language. I felt tears prick the back of my eyes again. I reached for her hand and squeezed. You're not ungrateful. You're awake. There's a difference. Her eyes shimmered. Thanks for making space for people like me. Thanks for stepping into it, I replied. That takes more courage than you know. Later, as the crowd thinned, I took a few minutes to myself by the railing. The Brooklyn skyline stretched out before me, patched with brick and steel, water towers and cranes. So many beginnings stitched into one horizon. I closed my eyes and let the sunlight brush my skin like a benediction. A memory surfaced, faint but fierce, of a phone call I'd once made after being rejected from a fellowship because I couldn't secure financial documentation from my family trust. I remembered hanging up and crying in the stairwell of my apartment, not because I was denied, but because I had no name to blame. Now, I have one, my own. Reporters began packing up. The sun dipped behind a chimney stack. Samuel had sent flowers, a white and green arrangement in a square vase. No note. Just the return address from his firm in D.C. It was enough. One guest asked if there'd be annual reports. Yes, I said, but more importantly, there'll be conversations. Another asked if we planned to scale. Maybe, I replied. But even if we stay small, we'll stay loud. As people trickled out, I stayed behind to help the staff stack chairs. No one told me to. I just wanted to. There was something grounding in wiping down a folding table with lemon oil and knowing it belonged to no one but the present moment. At last, I gathered my things. Before I left, I took one final look at the rooftop, the scattered petals from the flower arrangements, the sound of the city below, and the sky fading into lavender. I used to be written out of the picture. Now I draw the whole frame. I used to think justice meant courtrooms and verdicts, but sometimes it simply means reclaiming your name and choosing what you build from pain. Maybe not everyone gets closure, but we all deserve clarity. And when truth is shared, not shouted, it has a way of landing exactly where it's meant to. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to follow the channel for more stories of quiet strength and resilience. Thank you for listening. Goodbye, and see you in the next story.